A lot of us, especially mothers, of course, though, have done a really good job of suppressing, avoiding denial. If I just get through this, if I kind of just white knuckle my way through this, it will get better. And unfortunately, that's just not how it works.
Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. For so many moms, the transition into motherhood can come with a sort of disconnect from self. Today's guest, Rachael Smith, helps moms discover their authentic selves in motherhood. Rachael is a licensed professional counselor and owner of After the Glow Counseling, as well as a wife and proud mom of two. She is committed to helping other women feel more supported, empowered, and less alone in their motherhood journey, which we are all about here at Worthy Mother Podcast. In this episode, we're going to get into the experience of what some might call losing yourself in motherhood, how to reconnect, and kind of the mental health impact of it all. So Rachael, welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. So excited to dig into this conversation. Can you introduce yourself and tell us maybe a little bit about your journey to becoming a postpartum and motherhood therapist?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me come on this podcast. I've been really looking forward to it, and it sounds like we're chasing after the same goals and aspirations. So this is awesome to be on here. But yeah, so I have been a therapist for the last almost 5 years now. And really in the last about 2 years, I'd say, really have focused in on the specific population of pregnancy, postpartum, and motherhood. And as you mentioned, I am a mother myself. And my first go around postpartum was wild and a whirlwind. And I think about almost every unexpected, kind of showed itself. And it was really through my own experiences in postpartum anxiety and depression. And I also ended up having postpartum preeclampsia as well, which I feel like really catapulted some of the stuff that I experienced and just navigated so much of it on my own. I started to do a lot of research on my own. I actually found a lot of, some of the bigger name therapists on Instagram at the time. And it just really kind of resonated with me that this was the area that I wanted to focus in and that I wanted to be able to be a place that mothers could come to that I really wished I had during that time period.
Yeah, we talk a lot on this podcast about social media and the implications of social media as mothers in, this century or this decade, really. The last 5 years, I think, have been so different than any time before that. We talk a lot about the negative things that come with social media, but I think there is really such a beauty in the fact that we're able to see resources, and whether that's for ourselves, see resources for ourselves as mothers and know okay, there's help out there, these things that I'm dealing with, I'm not alone. But also as practitioners, as people who want to support moms, to see okay, other people are doing this, and just the impacts of that and how much this industry of supporting moms is growing in that way. It's really beautiful to reflect on that. So I think it's cool that that's part of your story. That's a huge part of my story as well. And yeah.
No, absolutely. I was, looking through and looking through. I'm like, oh, wow, this is an area that people actually specialize in. This is an area that people go and get, certifications in, and not just this general thing that maybe, a therapist learns about. These therapists and providers commit to this area and this population, and I love it. And I really appreciative for the ones that I even reached out to, and I was like, how did you do this? What was the process like? What did you need? And so I'm sure they don't remember those conversations, but I'm very appreciative of them for those.
Yeah. So I'm curious, in your own journey postpartum, what did this idea kind of losing yourself, what did that look like for you? And what has the process of reconnecting with your authentic self looked like since then?
Yeah, absolutely. Those first probably 3 or 4 months postpartum just feel like a daze to me at this point. I did not realize at the time, I think, the place that I had gotten to, and really just operating out of a very much autopilot mode and in very much a place of just surviving. It was a lot of going through the motions, a lot of confusion, and why is this so hard for me? What is wrong with me? I feel like I became very kind of recluse just within myself and very isolated because it was so much I was trying to navigate and figure out for myself, let alone trying to communicate that to other people around me. And I think I just, I was like, okay, I guess this is just how it is. This is what motherhood is. I don't know if other people just don't talk about this or this is just harder for me. So like I said, I just really got lost within myself and just kind of accepted like this is just how it was. And then my daughter around, like toddler age is when COVID happened. And so it was like maybe just as I was starting to kind of venture out of the postpartum world and start to get a little curious of, who am I now? Then the world shuts down. And it kind of just hit the, nail deeper down into the ground of like, well, now I really am at home. I really am isolated. And once again, just kind of accepted, like, I guess I'll just be a stay-at-home mom. Like, I guess this is what I'll do. And after finishing up my master's degree and really exploring more of this area of perinatal mental health, I think that's where it really started to expand out for me and realize this is something that I really value, that I really just means so much to me. And it allowed me another way to just be myself outside of who I am as a mom.
Yeah. I just had Allie McQuaid, a millennial mom therapist,
Oh,
on the
I love her
podcast,
so
and
much.
she's amazing. We talked about the pandemic and having kids during that time. It sounds like our kids are probably around the same age. My oldest is about to turn 7, and so he was like he
Yep.
was like 18 months when the pandemic started.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I relate so much to what you just said, where I think, I can't say what it was like not having my first kid at that time, but it's like at this time where maybe I would have started to feel like myself again. It
Hmm.
was all of a sudden like, just kidding. Like the
Yeah.
world, we all had to isolate, right? Like we all were so kind of just in survival mode in that way. And so what a interesting, unique experience. But I do, talking to other moms and hearing other experiences, it's like that happens anyway. There's just maybe usually an opportunity to get out of that sooner. I'm
Yes.
actually curious about that because a lot of times when we're talking about this idea of losing ourselves, it is in the postpartum period, right? It's during that transition into motherhood, and it makes
Hmm.
sense. You said like going into autopilot there
Hmm.
happened with you. And I'm curious with moms that you work with, do you get the feeling or the sense that that continues on beyond the postpartum period because of that autopilot? Like, what kind of is the natural next thing that happens after that losing yourself in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said right there, that it kind of goes beyond the postpartum period, which, that's a whole conversation in itself because it's like, are we talking about the 6 week period?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about a year period? But I think, for some of us, we just, like I mentioned for myself, it's just, okay, I guess this is just how it is. And this is what I'm going to kind of agree to, whether I really think that's what's in my best interest or not. And I think it comes down to a lot of recognizing and having that ability to be self-aware, because once we're self-aware, we are able to kind of highlight or pinpoint that, hey, something needs to start changing or something needs to be different here. And until that happens, we just kind of keep going on and not really thinking much of it. But once that self-awareness piece comes into play, it opens up the possibility for so many different things and how
Yeah.
you want to respond once you get into that place of self-awareness.
When moms are coming to you, is it like, do they have that self awareness piece, or is it a lot of times something else that's bringing them in? And maybe in therapy, they maybe
Hmm.
recognize a dissatisfaction
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
disconnect.
I think it's a combination of both. I think it can be kind of interesting, and sometimes we can be over self-aware, and that can be a challenge in and of itself because it's like, cognitively or up here, I'm able to very much think my way or I can identify it. But then beyond that, that's where we can get really stuck. And that can be frustrating because you're like, I understand this. I get that. I know that. I can, identify this. But now what? And then I think for other individuals, it's just kind of recognizing that something's off. Something is impacting their, daily existence, their ability to be present and to enjoy things. And then along the way, a lot of times, some of that other stuff starts to become uncovered and that self-awareness starts to come to light. And we all have that, but there has to be kind of that first thing that really hits us and we're like, oh.
Yeah. So in the process of understanding, like, okay, there's something off, and like, this is not exactly how I want to be living my motherhood. I'm disconnected with who I am. What are some things that a mom can do to start to reconnect, to start to rediscover her true self? Even like, motherhood's overwhelming. There's so much going on constantly. So where do we start?
Yeah, yeah. I think where you start maybe doesn't matter as much as you start somewhere that is realistic and attainable. Because sometimes I think when we do kind of get hit with those floodgates of self awareness and, oh, I want to do these things, and this is something that I've been putting off for so long, it can be very overwhelming. And we can sometimes try to do too much all at once, or, the steps are too big. And then sometimes it doesn't, pan out the way that we wanted to. And that has, so much less to do with the fact that, you weren't capable of doing it. It was just kind of the process that you took to get there. And so being realistic, I think too, about maybe the season of motherhood with where you're at, what I was doing for myself when my youngest was fresh newborn versus now is going to look different because I have more energy. I'm sleeping through the night. Support systems look different. He goes, to childcare. And so recognizing too, like the season of life that you're in. But, even if it is just being intentional with really cutting out like 5 minutes of your day for yourself. And whether that's just kind of sitting with yourself and reconnecting with yourself, or is it exploring things that maybe you used to enjoy to see if that's something that you still want to have a part of your life or not. And I think just a little bit too of like the internal dialogue, when we start to have shifts with how we speak to ourselves, or not having any type of guilt for wanting to have time for ourselves or showing up for ourselves. And so, whatever it is, I think it needs to be small and attainable so that you can build up onto it. Because if you think maybe kind of like rings of a ladder, if they're spread out much closer together, you can reach those much easier. But if you have them way too far apart, you probably can't get to that next ring as easily. And it's not that you're not capable, it's just that it was way too big of a step to take in the first place.
Yeah, what's coming forward to me is like the need for acceptance of where we're at, like both as an individual, but also like in what our responsibility and the load of motherhood is. Because I think that piece there about like, I don't know, it's bringing forward that like, yes, motherhood does change things. And it's going to also change your relationship to self and also like the things that you enjoy to do. Because like there is going to be less time. There's going to be less priority on other things because like now you all of a sudden have this human that's like the most important thing, right?
Yes.
So I think that is so important, like the
Yes.
self-compassion that can come with
Yes.
accepting that like this isn't a problem to be fixed necessarily in the sense of like I'm just going to solve and be reconnected to myself and whatever. It's more of like those little steps to get there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the self-compassion is so huge. And, you mentioned the acceptance piece. And so specifically there's a term radical acceptance. And so that's, maybe I don't really love this. Maybe I'm having a hard time being okay that for this period of my, motherhood life or season that it is going to look different. But you have to be willing to accept that that is the reality that you're in, because that will keep you limited in problem solving. And if this is not how you want it to continue, when you're able to radically accept, it says, okay, this is how it is now. And, one, what can I do right now in the immediate moment? But also, what could 2 months from now look like, a year from now look like? When we have a hard time accepting kind of the season of life that we're in, it can cause a lot of additional suffering that maybe isn't always necessary.
Yeah. So something I am wondering is in your practice as a mental health therapist, if you see a connection between maybe not dealing with this, oh, I've lost myself in motherhood, I'm not connected with myself, whether a mom is aware of that or not. But if there's a connection between that and then dealing with mental health issues, whether that's clinical depression and anxiety or just like whatever else would come with
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that can be said for, anyone, not even if we're talking about, motherhood or perinatal mental health,
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, especially mothers, of course, though, have done a really good job of suppressing, avoiding denial. If I kind of just white knuckle my way through this, it will get better. And unfortunately, that's just not how it works. And so, even like you mentioned, if we're beyond, that definition timeline of postpartum, that stuff will still be there. We just won't say it's, you know, postpartum anxiety. It's just good old anxiety at that point. Or I think a lot of things will just show up in ways that maybe we don't expect because we're like, well, I don't have a baby anymore. Why is this so hard? And avoiding reality or avoiding whatever is impacting us doesn't make it go away. And you can kind of think of it as like a pressure cooker. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to keep the lid on. If I keep the lid on, it'll like simmer and it'll go away. And maybe it will go away, we think, for a while, but eventually it does explode and it definitely does catch up to us. And then that's a whole lot we're trying to unravel all at once, or it's starting to maybe impact like relationships or our quality of work or our ability to concentrate. Or a lot of us will experience, somatic symptoms, a lot of like chronic illnesses, will take shape. And so, you know, whether you deal with it now or you deal with it later, it will show up in some form or fashion.
Yeah. I think that's an important reminder that like it doesn't just go away. You do have to deal with these things, and
Yeah.
that tendency to like shove it down,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, I think in motherhood can be amplified because there is so much else going on, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like when am
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
supposed to deal with my stuff?
Right. And motherhood is forever. So,
Yeah.
we put so much emphasis on like the postpartum period, which is wonderful and it's needed, and this is what so many of us have been advocating for. But at the end of the day, you're still a parent, you're still a mother. There's going to be different things that present themselves along the way that impact us or are incredibly unexpected. Or, a lot of us that, and I can speak for myself, a big thing that happened when I became a mother is, really getting hit with things that I experienced in childhood that I didn't recognize at the time were affecting me. And as my children enter into different ages and different, stages of life, once again, some of that stuff is getting resurfaced again for the first time. And so it's, do I keep white knuckling until, the end of time? Or can I give myself some self compassion and recognize that I deserve to, heal and work through these things? So,
Yeah. So there is still a lot of shame and stigma around postpartum mental health struggles and mental health struggles in general, I would say, especially for moms. I would think that's fair to say that as moms, we feel sometimes like we should have it all together and we should be
mhm.
dealing with this. And if we're struggling because of our kids or because we are moms, then it feels like completely shameful, right?
Yes, yes.
What would you say to a mom who is silently wondering if what she's experiencing with her mental health is, quote, normal or
Mhm.
something that maybe it's time to look at and address and
Right.
work with a therapist, a medical provider,
Yeah.
whoever on dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really, kind of my experience, unfortunately, was the what the heck is going on? What is wrong with me? And so I think that's why these types of conversations and these platforms and these resources to have these conversations are just so necessary, because there were not people in my life, there were not conversations that were happening around me to, you know, give me some insight or prepare me for like if this does happen, X, Y, and Z. And so first and foremost, I think it's always so important just to, acknowledge and show that compassion in terms of, they are absolutely not alone. Whatever that you're dealing with is not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. I think every mother deserves to enjoy motherhood as much as, our children enjoy their childhood. And so I think just giving that validation, but also too, I think unfortunately there's been so many things that we've identified as normal are more so common, because common and normal aren't necessarily the same thing. And we can have very common experiences and there can be very common things that happen, but we don't want the norm to be that we just accept it and push through it because that's what everybody does. And so it's kind of like a twofold of, yes, like having that message be delivered that I promise you are not the only one dealing with this. And please don't think, though, that that just is how it should be. I think that whole idea needs to kind of be reevaluated of what we consider normal for, so many painful and traumatic experiences that moms can go through.
Yeah, what's coming back around for me is like that idea of accepting where you're at and not like necessarily feeling like I'm accepting this and I'm stuck here. It's like
Mhm.
we can know that what we're experiencing and the challenges we're having, this happens to other moms. You're not alone.
Mhm.
Also, that does not mean you have to stay there and
Right.
not seek support. It's like, no, that's the reason to seek support. You're good.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Go seek
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think why when more people that can get exposed to these conversations maybe prior to having the child is so important because, that mental load of like, okay, cool, I've got it. Like my brain is a mush right now, but who do I seek out? Where do I
Yeah.
go? Like, what does that look like? Making that phone call, making that appointment, depending on what it is that you're navigating, that can feel as if one of the most overwhelming, complex things that you have to accomplish. So, getting those connections ahead of time and being like, oh, so this is what Rachel was talking about. Like, let me reach out to her or whoever, the person might be. So,
Yeah. So important. So we've kind of spoke to this a little bit, but motherhood does often like actually change things, right? It's not just like this idea of you've lost yourself in motherhood, reconnect to who you were before, right? Because like our values change, our priorities are obviously going to change.
yeah.
How do we make peace with those shifts instead of resisting it? Because I think that is a hard part of this conversation of like, I don't feel like myself.
Hmm.
I'm trying to figure out who I am and connect to that authentic version of myself, but like it's different and that feels weird sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just giving yourself that permission to change. We are all allowed to change, and that can include what we value and what we prioritize. And, becoming a mother is one of the most transformative experiences in someone's life. So, when you think about it, I think it makes a lot of sense that there would be things that would change. And, just because maybe we feel guilty for maybe some of these changes, it doesn't necessarily mean it's justified, and allowing yourself that space to work through that and what that might entail. And, is it because I'm more worried about someone else's opinion of, these changes, or do I feel like this goes against my morals or values in some way?
Yeah. That's so important. Looking to see what is coming in from outward
Hmm.
that may be
Yeah.
influencing that.
Absolutely. Because, going back to kind of like the autopilot, there's so many thoughts that run through our head on a daily basis. And we come to realize a lot of the time through a lot of that work of self awareness and, inner healing and whatnot, that a lot of that stuff aren't thoughts of our own. They're thoughts of other people and, environments that we've been exposed around, or societal expectations and pressures. And when you're able to make that separation of, I'm having that thought, but I don't actually agree with that thought, that can be really powerful in itself, too.
Yeah, totally, completely agree with that. Is there anything that you would want to leave a mom who's listening to this right now and feeling maybe lost in motherhood or unsure of who she is, what that even means? Is there anything you want to leave her with?
I think kind of circling back to one of the questions you asked me before was just that, you're not alone. And as lonely as it can feel, I can promise you that you are not. You did nothing wrong. This is not your fault. And we can be as prepared as we think we can be, but there are so many unexpecteds that present themselves, and a lot of loss of control that happens in motherhood as well. And so finding that self-compassion for yourself, that you're doing your best. I can promise you that even on your hardest days, you're the best person for your baby.
Ugh, I love that. Love that so much. Okay, Rachel. So at the end of these episodes, I like to dig in a little bit to self care. I know there's a lot of like different thoughts on conversations around self care, particularly when we're talking to moms. But I
Yeah.
think it's really important to normalize moms being cared for and knowing how to take care of themselves. So I would love to ask you how you take care of yourselves and just if you have any advice for moms to make sure that they are regularly taken care of as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I think you bring up a great point that self-care has become quite a hot topic of conversation these days. And Ultimately, I think self-care is however that individual deems it to look. And once again, going back to like what season of life are you in? How much sleep are you getting? What support do you have? What does your village look like? And that's going to ebb and flow. That's going to change. That's going to adjust to just variations of life for you. And so we still can figure out ways that you're getting that self care. And I think it's important to find things that are very more like short term, those little like blurbs that you can get that give you that immediate, like, oh, that felt good. That was nice. And I kind of categorize that in terms of thinking of like the bubble baths or the massages or maybe something that's a bit more luxurious or time consuming. Those are wonderful and great, and there's nothing wrong with them. And I think that what gets left out a lot of the time are the ways that we, fill up our self care cup in a long term sense. And that might look more of like, what are you reading? What are you listening to? Who are the people you're surrounding yourself around? Boundaries are a huge one. And so, like, protecting your like emotional energy, movement, how you, like I said, want to spend your time, therapy, any like somatic type healing. And so I think there's just making sure that you have enough of those things that it kind of ebbs and flows. We don't want to think of it as like a complete balance, like a teeter totter, and it balances out completely. It's like, okay, I've had a quite few of like more of the short term self care. Now let me make sure I kind of do something over here to get that long term self care going as well. But for myself, I feel like for a long time, really just focused on more of the short term stuff. It was like, okay, I got a massage and I did that once every 6 months, and I was thinking that was going to be fine and dandy. And you realize like that's not going to sustain you long term. Like those short term ones, I like to think is kind of like the stepping stones that are fillers for the longer self care ones. And so therapy has been a huge one for me. And then just even kind of noting on that, like I feel like I've had my most transformative healing this last year or so, and my oldest is almost 7. And so I think that once again just really pinpoints that there's no timeline for any of this stuff. Boundaries has been a huge one in terms of various relationships and where I give my energy to. Communication with people that are in my lives, I think that's a big one for like spouses, partners, husbands. That's something my husband and I have really committed to over the last couple years. Listening to my body, I really prioritize rest and sleep and listening to what I need. So,
I love asking this question because there are things that people say, and I'm like, I haven't thought of it that way. And I love that idea of like thinking about it as short term and long term self care. So that's something I will take into my understanding of what it means to care for ourselves, because I think that's a good way to kind of categorize those things. Because sometimes I think in the conversation we think of those, what you distinguished as like short term self care, as like bad. Like we shouldn't be talking about those things. It's like, well, it's not bad to do those things. It can actually be
right.
really great, like to show yourself some love and get a massage. Like that's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
But also
Yeah.
like it's going to help in that moment.
Yes.
But there's things we need to be doing on a long-term basis, like
Yeah.
getting enough sleep, like setting boundaries with people. Going to
Mm-hmm.
therapy is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I feel like unfortunately some of the like self-care stuff's gotten like a bad rap. They've gotten like
yeah,
labeled the villain, and I'm like, no, there's nothing wrong with them. We just don't want that to be the only thing
yeah,
that we are relying on to fill ourselves up. So
yeah. I have all kinds of thoughts on it. So I love just getting to have the conversations with other people who care about this stuff.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're going to hear so many different variations. And I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, as long as that individual, when they sit with themselves and they're honest and they think about, what am I needing? Am I getting those things? If they're at peace with that, then I don't think it's up to anyone else to decide what that looks like.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Rachel, where can listeners find you? How can they even maybe work with you, or if they are in, states that you work with
Yeah.
clients in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently licensed to see clients in Kentucky and Ohio. I offer all my services virtually. I am accepting clients right now. So my website is an easy one to reach out, www.aftertheglowcounseling.com. And then, of course, on Instagram, there's a lot of easy ways to connect and a lot of links that I have in my bio. But my handle is After the Glow, and then another underscore.
And like really great content on there. So definitely go give Rachael a follow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachael, for being here and taking the time to have this conversation. I love talking about this stuff. There's so many little pieces in here that I'm going to take with me. So I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for asking me to be on here and chat with you. And I'd love to come back again.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for tuning in. You are worthy, Mama.